Hello everyone, today we're going to talk a little bit about the reception of the Viking Age and Viking mythology in contemporary culture and the possible uses and abuses of this very controversial age, so to speak, because throughout history it has been instrumented and interpreted in multiple ways. So we're going to have a look at how nowadays they are portrayed. So, first of all, a basic idea that the past has a past, and the Viking Age, particularly the sources on Norse mythology, have been, so to speak, rediscovered in the 16th and 17th century, because it was a century when Iceland was regarded as some kind of glamorous realm about which no one really knew much, and it has become popular from this point of view as an attractive source of fairy tales, so to speak. There were also people from Iceland who tried to popularize the Old Age, such as Arngrimur Jónsson with his book Krimo Gea, which is literally Iceland. It is a book about Norse myth. Then people from Scandinavia also were wondering about their own origins. So that's why scholars such as Johannes Magnus started digging into the distant past, going even further back than the Vikings, going back to the Goths and bringing the idea of Gothicism into attention. Then there was the antiquarian interest, which was common not only in Scandinavia but in the whole of Europe. We have, for example, Ole Worm, who published something about Danish history. And then outside of the Nordic space, we have English authors such as Henry Spelman, Thomas Gray, or Thomas Percy, who were also wondering about the connections between the history of England and the Viking Age and its heritage. Then after this curiosity, so to speak, or this attempt at rediscovering the ancient past, there evolved kind of like a political myth about Germanic peoples in general. So not only about medieval or pre-Christian Scandinavians, but also about all kinds of Germanic people, starting with what Tacitus in Germania used to write about, and up until family sagas or very recent writings, actually from Iceland in particular. So all kinds of stereotypes were developed, such as freedom, democracy, simple life. These are all in connection with the myth of the good savage. So these Germanic peoples were interpreted as opposite to Southern Europe or the heirs of the Roman Empire, who were seen as decadent, aristocratic, and so on. And from this, there was only a small step towards the myth of the superior race, this grand vision of Germanic unity and identity, which became very rooted, particularly in Germany in the 20th century. Norse mythology, not exactly the Viking Age, but Norse mythology. So the myths of the Viking Age were incorporated into this grand Germanic national epic, with the help of Wagner in particular. But besides Wagner and his ring cycle, there were also all kinds of weird ideas circulating in this time, ideas about a mystical racial identity, about rune magic as a way to gain access to some kind of hidden energies in the universe. There was also Guido von List's idea of the elite priesthood, the Votanist priesthood, as a political entity that preserved old Germanic wisdom or Aryan wisdom. These groups, which were pseudo-scholarly groups, also had connections with the Nazi Party and helped spread Nazi ideology, in particular the Thule Society. Besides Germany, there was also some kind of marginal use in the British Isles. For example, Thomas Carlyle with his book on heroes and hero worship, and then William Morris with his passion for Iceland and his attempts at archaic poetry, and obviously in Scandinavia with the Romantic revival in all kinds of arts, such as painting, literature, and so on. So we have a strong base for this reception of the Viking Age and the Viking mythology, which brings us to the contemporary age. I'm going to briefly discuss four possible receptions of Vikings and Northern mythology, which is visual media, so films, then the far right and the political misuse, religious groups, new heathenry respectively, and a little bit on pagan metal or the offshot Viking metal. So first of all, what I think has probably the most important influence on the way we perceive the Viking Age nowadays and the way we talk about it and the way we refer to it is the very popular and acclaimed series Vikings, which engages the public very, very actively. Now, that's why it cannot be considered really a historical drama, but rather a fiction based on some historical facts, but other non-historical ideas. So the series, as I perceive it, is a tad simplified or sketched, or there are many narratives that come together that are conflated. They can also be very confusing sometimes because they use all kinds of sources. This is actually something which I think is a very good idea, the fact that they used all kinds of primary evidence and references to the old texts, even references which are actually not very known to the public. Another very positive aspect about the series is that they tried to show as much material culture as possible. They also showed a lot of background activities, so not only the raiding parties and the warriors and so on. Many people were doing all kinds of stuff, so they tried to show the diversity of this society. Then another positive aspect was the fact that they tried to imagine ritual and what religious ritual, funerals, for example, might have looked like. Of course, we have very few pieces of evidence regarding ritual, but it is interesting and engaging both for the public and for historians, I think, to think about the possibility of such rituals as presented in the series. Then another thing which I liked was the fact that they tried to show the different clashes and relationships between cultural values, similarities, differences, and so on, and all kinds of peoples, not only the Norse and Anglo-Saxons, also Franks and Greeks and other people. So these are positive aspects. Yeah, this ethnographic feeling and this feeling of a large narrative with multiple peoples involved, and the attempt to assume based on some kind of evidence, to make assumptions about what people might have lived alike or what they might have thought alike in that age. However, a host of new myths is promoted with this series. First of all, what they looked like. So this very metal style, it's very attractive, it's very fun, I admit. I also kind of like it, but it is very modern, so it has nothing to do with, for example, what reenactors do. So if you really want to know more about what Vikings looked like and what they did, it's best to follow at least the reenactment groups, which are more accurate than the series. So this is a problem: the fact that they are promoting a host of new myths regarding aesthetics, appearance, also regarding what they did and how they did, and another aspect which I found very irritating is something that I have noticed in many series about historical topics, is the fact that they tend to use a lot the self-defined identity. Throughout the whole series, you are going to hear very often, we are Vikings, we are pagans, we are, and so on. They do not speak like that. So Vikinger was an activity. It meant raiding. It was kind of like a summer job. These people did not define themselves as Vikings. So we can gain a very false idea about what Viking really was and about their identity. One more thing the series brings to attention, which is also relevant for the other uses of the Viking Age and Viking mythology, is this contest between Christianity seen as the authoritarian, and dominant discourse, and Nordic paganism seen as some kind of attempt at rediscovering the old roots. So it's a shift towards a more personalized mystical experience, also noticeable in many neo-pagan groups nowadays, this attempt to rediscover or to recreate a bond or a community. And this idea of an idealized group of people, in this case the Vikings, which is opposed to, the globalizing society, and as a way of reframing heritage in an entertaining way, but at the same time revisiting some of the old ideas about this this age. So the focus on the militaristic aspects and on the raiding groups and so on. Of course, they also involve a lot of women in this series, women as warriors. Again, kind of like a controversial aspect. We get the idea that they're pointing into the feminist direction, but like I said before, they're promoting other myths, in this case the overrepresentation of women, which are also integrated into this Männerbund ethos. Now, Vikings in this series, especially when they're engaged in religious practices, they are presented as in a very warm environment, with welcoming colors. It is insisted on this idea of camaraderie, friendship, on the aspect of paradise, or a very close-knit community and so on, unlike other characters in the show, which are presented not as very athletic, not as very fit, not as very moral even. So there's a very, very positive look on Northmen, on pagan Northmen. Now, which brings us to the other idea. The same danger there was we had in the 19th century prevails nowadays as well. So Vikings can be used in all kinds of political ideologies to promote far right or white supremacist messages. Generally speaking, white supremacists and far right groups, they tend to use very simplistic language, very simplistic narratives meant to trigger violent hate. The basic model is precisely this one of the barbaric warrior, as a symbol of a very idealized Northern Europe, who is fighting against anything from the outside. So this barbarian warrior is seen as something very homogeneous, and as a symbol of a superior group of people who really need to stick to their heritage. We have the Sons of Odin, for example. This is a vigilantes group founded in Finland, now spread throughout Europe and Canada as well. They define themselves as the protectors of Europe and the some kind of raven warriors coming to the rescue, for example, then we know this guy, of course, from the pictures on social media, very popular at some point, the capital shaman, who is using symbols such as Thor's hammer, the Yggdrasil, the world tree, or the Valknut is a symbol associated to Odin on runic snows, but we're not sure what it means. Other tattoos of this guy might point out, yeah, you can't really see them here, but some of them might also point out to the to some kind of Sonnenrad, the black sun. This points out into the direction of the far right. Of course, whenever we have such images or people or groups, we always need to look at the broader context. So we also need to look at other ideas they're entertaining, or at other associations they have. So it's not enough just to see the a hammer of Thor or the Yggdrasil on someone and just make some assumptions. We have to look at all kinds of other symbols that are integrated into a specific code of communication. In this case, the far right, who also uses runes, obviously. Yeah, for example, the Odal rune, this used to be, if it had small wings here at the bottom, it would have clearly been a symbol of the SS race office, the one dealing with the purity, the racial purity of the SS. However, it is still a controversial symbol, even in this case, even without the wings. We have here the emblem of the National Socialist movement, either way. Yeah. There are many other examples. I'm going to just give one more, which is this very controversial company called Thorsteinn Nut. Nordic company. It sells merchandise. It has been very controversial and associated with all kinds of neo-Nazi groups in Germany, in Brandenburg in particular. It has been pointed out that this symbol, also two runes reminding of the wolf angel symbol, also used in the far right scene. Now, of course, there have been reactions to this simplistic and violent reception of Viking symbols, people who are trying to point out to the multiculturalism, diversity of Vikings and so on, which makes sense. It makes sense to take those symbols away, to detach them from their far right use, and to put them in other contexts, into a more open and less bigot context, of course. That's not to say that these people, for example, are not promoting other myths. Yes, Vikings were not feminists. They were not involved in the LGBT movement, of course. These are very modern concepts that have adopted these Viking symbols. So first in the negative way, and now people are trying to redeem these symbols. That's why a very common question nowadays is if Viking culture and if these Viking symbols can be saved from their political misuse. New heathens have the same problem because there are certain gray zones. In America, for example, we have the odalist movement, or the Odinic movement, which has been associated with racism from its very beginning. But nowadays, these movements, the heathen movements, are much more diverse. Many movements accept people who are not Nordic, for example, or who are LGBT, or whatever other identification they have. So they are trying to make new heathenry much more inclusive. So new heathenry is a very broad concept. Yeah, so we can have the ethnocentric new heathenry. We can have the eclectic new heathenry, and everything in between. And there is, of course, a great dose of personal understanding and interpretation. Many of the people who call themselves new heathens nowadays actually say that they do not belong to any group, that they are just trying to rediscover or invent some personal gnosis while taking inspiration from the Northern European past. This can have multiple reasons. Yeah, either it's, I don't know, attractive per se, or it's perceived to have more connection with nature, or it is perceived as being opposed to a dominant religion, or it is also influenced by other uses of this Viking past, films, movies, books, music, and so on. This is actually a group. It's called the Ósatrúarfélagið. It is from Iceland, founded in the 70s, and it has been actually recognized as an official religion. Now counts, I think, 1,000 members or so. These people are engaged in all kinds of rituals. They also organize weddings or baptisms and so on, offerings on different occasions, the so-called blot, and then they are also, or they have been recently involved precisely in this movement of detachment from negative connotations. Icelanders actually, I think they are the most opposed to this misuse, because they really do perceive a very close connection to their northern ancestors, and yeah, for good reason. They have a much vivid perception of their Viking forefathers, so to speak. So they are trying to make use of symbols such as arm rings, and to wear costumes reminding of the Viking Age, so they can be either reconstructed or reinvented. Like we said before, much of these rituals is actually reinvented because of the scarce sources we have. These idols are inspired from archaeology, for example, but other things are not. Rituals are not, because we don't really have information about that. So they are trying basically to take bits of information from the Eddas, from the sagas, from archaeology and so on, and combine them into some kind of new religion. Now, another use of Viking culture and mythology is in the scene called Viking metal, which is an offshoot of black metal. So it's part of the metal scene, dealing with some narratives that also point to a symbolic collectivity or a cultural memory around this concept of northerness. So this is also born from the intertextual play with old sources, or old interpretation of sources. Again, the Romantic revival of the 19th century. They use all kinds of imagery. Yeah, so either something resembling the a Viking outfit, so to speak, or something taken from archaeology, either from the Viking Age or before the Viking Age, landscapes reminding of Northern Europe, or battlegrounds and so on. They're trying to create a sense of epicness in a playful way. It's kind of like a carnival, if you want, a form of escapism, a form of artistic engagement with the past. This, of course, also points out to this idea of telling stories that have been forgotten in a globalizing world, pretty much in the same way new heathens are doing. But most of these groups do not have actually a political purpose. They do tend somehow to use sometimes some controversial topics, but this should also be regarded as a part of the visual transgression or the provocation of boundaries, which is actually defining for the scene. We are talking about extreme metal. We are talking about a kind of shock culture that wants to play with taboos, that wants to play with these gray zones in order to create a sense of controversy around it, which helped it grow as a scene, basically. Like I said, it evolved from black metal which used satanic imagery, and then Viking metal came along, and some bands thought it would be an interesting idea if as a means of escapism or as a rebellion, they could dwell on other topics. In our case, some aspects of Viking culture and Viking mythology. So it's scholars basically describe this as a form of discursive transgression, as a countercultural vision. Yeah, the archaic past is recast in terms of a countercultural vision, and as a form of escapism. We have these stereotypes of epicness, strength, and masculinity, but it is used in another code, so to speak. These references, although they tend to retake these controversial elements, they're also creating a space of communication with an audience which is passionate about, generally speaking, these extremist approaches, controversial topics, and so on. Many themes are used, from gods to objects, events, characters, and all kinds of things. We find them in the lyrics, we find them in the visual art, and so on. It has also been called an art religion. The scholar Stefanie von Schnurbein, for example, when she's talking about everything related to the reception of Viking culture, is using the concept of art religion. Art religion, so it has a religious connotation in the sense that the past is being reused, sometimes with great reverence, and at the same time it is used in an aesthetic, artistic way. What can we learn from all these examples of the use and misuse of Viking symbols and all these gray zones and intertextual intersections that might come up? We can learn that the Viking symbols can be used in very, very diverse manners, and in a very broad spectrum, whether it is artistic, religious, or political. This points out to the fact that we actually do know a little about this age. That's why it has been, that's why the empty spaces have been filled with our imagination over the centuries. And we have learned that it is important to make the difference between authentic knowledge and these modern interpretations. That's why I think that both history enthusiasts and scholars of the Viking Age, archaeologists, and so on, should make an effort to popularize their findings, their results, in order to draw attention on this aspect of reception, in order to build up our education regarding this age. Because as you can see, not only what I presented here, but also all kinds of YouTube channels, for example, are talking about the Viking Age in a very superficial and maybe devoid of depth or understanding way. So that's why it's important to bridge the gap between the general public and scholarship, in order for us to critically receive whatever Viking reception we can get in our contemporary age. Thank you.